So hello and welcome on my Spline design course. In this video we will take a look at the Spline app interface and we will understand what it consists of and how to interact with it. As I said before, for me, experience of using Spline app is pretty the same as using Figma. First of all, it's a free online tool. Yes, you can buy a subscription and you will have some additional options available, but during this course, free version will be enough. Spline works at any platform, so if you have a Windows or Mac or Linux, you can use Spline because Spline is an online tool. You can use it directly in your browser. But my personal recommendation is to download the desktop app. Even the desktop app also just a browser, but you will have a quick access to the app and you don't need to download updates. The app will be updated as soon as you restart it. This is a home screen, the start point. Here you can see pretty familiar interface. From the top we have a tab section, so here you can switch between your projects or create a new one, like in Figma. Then we have a navigation. By default, we start at homepage, the place where you can see your last projects and also two sections, Spline tutorials and some examples from the library. By the way, here we see the scene library, so every scene in this library will open like a new file. But in Spline you also have a library of 3D models, which you can add into your project. In My Files, you can see all Spline project you created and working on. You can sort it, nothing too hard. In the Shared with Me section, you will see project you can edit in a collaboration mode, so if someone invites you to the Spline project, you will find it there. Community, my lovely place. In one of our videos, we will talk more about community, so for now we will skip this part. In a nutshell, it's something like Figma community, the place where you can share your projects or remix projects other creators. Then we have tutorials, the full list of available tutorials made by Spline team. I also recommend it to review. Library. This is the brilliant collection of what you can do in Spline, or at least reuse. The library has sections, so for example in this section, you can see how you can use the cloner option. Very useful. Feel free to explore this library. We also have an inbox, so when, for example, someone shared the Spline project with you, you will know it from this page. It's like a notification. Also, here, in the bottom, there is one really useful page, Updates. Here you can read about what was fixed or added in the last Spline update. Now let's start create our first project. You can create a new project by clicking on this button or by this button in the tab. You also can see this button, Import, which is actually opens a pop-up with information which objects you can import in Spline. So it can be a video, but like a texture, not like a file, and you need a paid subscription. 3D objects like GLTF, FBX, OBJ, so you can find the internet free 3D models and import them into the Spline. Very useful option. Sound files to make an interactions with the sound. Vector, so you can for example import any SVG icon and make it in 3D. Then image and also a Spline local file. By default Spline has an autosave and it works super cool, but you can save your Spline project as a local file. Okay, create a new file. This is the project tab. From what this project tab consists of. First and the main is the viewport. This is the space where you will work with your 3D object. So first what you need to understand is how to orient in this space. Look at this space as a workspace like in every graphic tool, where usually you can move your frames, rectangles and other stuff to the left or to the right, up and down. In graphic tools like Sketch and Figma we use two-axis system, X and Y. So here the same, but we have one more axis, Z, which is depth. So you can move your object to the front and back. All nuances about how to move and rotate objects and the camera or viewport we will learn in one of our next video. But for now you need to understand that in Spline this is a viewport, the space where you will work with your 3D objects. From the left side you can see this panel. We can call this as a layer panel, because here you will see the layers of your object in the viewport. Every object in the viewport has a layer. The same as Figma or Sketch where you can see the layers with your rectangles, in Spline you can see layers with your objects. But one key difference here. In graphic tools like Figma or Sketch, the hierarchy of layers in the layer panel is very important, because every layer from the top will mean that the one object will be on top of the other. So let's say if you have a button which consists of text layer and rectangle, your text layer should be above the rectangle layer. Here in Spline, the position of layer doesn't affect what you will see in the viewport, because you work in 3D space. So layers in Spline you need first of all to quickly find and select object from your scene in case when it's hard to select from the viewport. So let's take a closer look to the layer panel. First we have a search. Here you can find layers by name, so name your layers. Then we have a menu, the regular menu with operations like create a new file, copy paste, select, and etc. Then we have a scene. In a free version you can create up to 3 scenes. Every scene has their own viewport, so it's like a pages in Figma, but in Spline logic you can use it as, for example, levels. So in Spline you can create a mini game, and game levels can be created by these scenes. But I use it when I create some collections, for example, icons in a unique style, so I can work with every icon in their own scene. By these icons you can or switch between scenes or create a new one. In the bottom you have a quick access to the library, and this library is really awesome. So this is object library, which means you can add any object from this library to your project. This is a pretty big library, so I really recommend you to use it. But also, from here, you can switch to the scene library, and these scenes will be opened in the new tab. Now let's take a look to the right side. Here we have a project panel. And here I can refer to Figma again, because something like that we also have in Figma. Until you select any object on your scene, you will see this panel with set of options of your project or current scene if you have more than one. So let's take a look what you can do here. First, you can see your user pick, and user picks other users if it's a collaboration mode. Then, the share button. So here you can invite to your project other people, and here you can share invite with different access level, viewer or editor. Also from here you can publish your work to the Spline community. Then, before we go next, short disclaimer. Not so far Spline has updated some parts of interface, and I expect that it could happen again. So maybe when you see this course after some time, maybe a year after release, some parts may look different than in this video. They could change some icons, replace or regroup some options, but what you should understand, what is what, and the fact that in this panel all options related to the scene, not to the object in the scene. So let's try to understand what is what. First section is viewport. This means from which camera you are looking right now to your scene. By default, it's a personal camera, so it means you see your scene and your objects because by default you have a camera, personal camera. You can't delete this camera, it always exists, but you can add a new camera to the viewport, and let's say you want to work and look at your scene from camera you had added, then you can switch it here. So this drop-down is responsible for which camera you will look through in your viewport, and I remind you that the viewport is this space you are working in. Next section is frame. Frame is like a size of your viewport or screen size. So by default the size is responsive, and most of the time it will be responsive. It means it doesn't matter from which screen your scene will be played. From big monitor or small phone screen, it will always fit the whole space of screen. So most of the time when you plan to export your scene as a web experience, you will stay at a responsive size. But if you want to export your scene as an image, for example, you can select or set a proper size. Also here you can change a guide color. This is a color of the area which is not included in the scene, outside the frame, just for your comfort. Also, you can find the frame option in the toolbar, so start thinking about frame when you will ready to export your scene. Next section is a scene background, so this is a color of your space. This color is visible when you export your scene, but you can make it transparent if, for example, you want to export PNG image without background. Next section is a play camera, and here important to point out the difference between viewport camera and play camera. As you already know, the viewport camera responds through which camera we are looking here while we work with our scene. Play camera means which camera we will looking through when we will play our scene. Play scene is this play icon. When you click play, you will see how your scene will look when it will be exported. So very popular case when you add to your scene a camera and set this camera to the play mode. But in viewport, you continue work with default personal camera, because then you can rotate scene and not to be afraid that you can lose your great angel. Next setting, light. Light is actually pretty important topic, and we will spend a whole lesson on it. But here I will quickly explain what this light doing. So first of all, here we are talking about ambient light, which I can call like a default light from everywhere. So even if you don't have a light source in your scene, and you still can recognize your object because it has some light and dark parts. It happens because we have an ambient light. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes you don't need it. You can turn it on or off from this section. Also, you can change a color of this light. So most of the time it will be white, but sometimes we need to imitate some warm light or cold, so you can set a little bit yellow or blue color on this light. And intensity, how strong or let's say how bright this light would be. But my personal recommendation, try to keep this value not more than 1. First time you can go with these default settings. And the last thing in this section, shadows. Here we have 3 options, and you will face something like this not only here. I can say that this is about performance. To show realistic shadows, Spline needs resources. The higher the quality of the shadows, the lower the performance of your scene. My advice, if you plan to export your scene as a web component, try to keep low faster options. But if you will export your project as an image, then you can select high slower. So on high slower option, shadows on your scene would be softer and more realistic. But it also can affect the performance of the spline, in case of your computer not powerful enough. Simulation. Here you can turn on physics, the thing which can help you create a nice experience with fallen objects, some minigames. At least now you know where you can turn it on, but don't rush. Then we have effects. This is some post-production thing, what you can apply before you will export your work. It will work like special lenses for your camera. So you can create a special effects like pixelation, aberration, something like stereo glitch, bloom, and etc. This effect is about stylization, so sometimes these effects can help you achieve some nice results. Then we have a fog. How do you imagine fog? We can see something ahead of us, but the farther away, the worse is it visible. So fog can create this effect. If you need it, turn it on, select the color of your fog if you need, or just use the same color as your background, and then set the near and far point. How to understand the near and far points? We will figure out later in this course. Like light in the spline, shadow also a big topic to discuss, which we will do in one of our next video. In a nutshell, when you will turn on ambient shadow, you will see the shadow where it actually should be, between objects, in the folds of the model, etc. It adds some realism to your scene as well. Global settings is responsible for your work process. I'm sure that most of the time you will not change anything here, but it's still quite useful to know what is what. So first we have 2 options here and this little icon. Let's start from grid plane. By default it's floor, X, Z. What does it mean? When I start rotate my scene, you can notice this grid, which is line on the floor. So that's why it calls floor. This is a type of helper. It can help you to draw, align or replace objects in space. X and Z is axes. X is a left and right direction or horizontal, and Z is a depth direction. So here we see the grid on these directions. You can switch the grid to front, back and sides. So now it's like a wall from the left or right side. I think that in the beginning of your way it actually can confuse you, so you can turn it off. Snapping is also one of the options you will not use in the beginning, so let's take a look at this icon and click on it. And here we have 3 additional options, and I will highlight only one option for now, helpers. When you create a new file, you might see this line. This is a line of the light source. This is a schematic line. Like a grid, you will not see this line in the play mode or when you will export your scene. This line just help you understand where is your camera and where is it looking at, where is your light and where is it lighting on. So sometimes you don't want to see these helpers. So here you can turn it off. And the final section here is assets. Here you will have material assets, color assets, image and sound assets. We will talk about assets later in this course. Here you will have a quick access to all your assets. We're done with project panel. Now let's quickly observe this toolbar. From this bar you can put objects to your scene. Under the plus icon you will find the whole list of all objects you can put, and right here the quick access to some of these objects. Then 2 modes of pointer, the selection or just regular mode, and comments. Like where would you think? Right, like in Figma, or mirror, like everywhere. Here you can leave comments. Then we have a frame options, and we know that we can change frame size from here or from project panel. Zoom. By default, it's 100. Use zoom when you need a closer look to some details. Then we have an export button. Here you can see how many options of export you have. We will talk about export later in this course. And the play button. In play mode, we also have a toolbar with restart, export as well, and close buttons. Sometimes you will see a different toolbar here, like when I will click on the frame settings. but we will see these other toolbars later. Now let's take a look at the last important panel here, this. Here you can see the ellipse with the colorful lines and switcher. Let's first understand what these things can do. So this control will change the view, and when I say view, I mean the camera position. So let's say we have an object in the center of our scene and by default in front of us. Using these little dots, I can switch the view from front to the side, for example. So now I'm looking at my object from the right side, from the left side, from the back side, from the top and from the bottom. And you can always went back to the default view by clicking reset button. So the colors here helps you understand the direction of axes. It's a representation of the coordinate axis. But honestly, it's pretty hard from the beginning to orient in axes by colors. I will explain it in the lesson about basic 3D principles. Here we have one more button, isometric. Maybe you already know what does it mean and how isometric illustration looks like. So in Spline, isometric is a special position of the camera, which allows us to see our object as how it should be in isometric style, from the top right side. And actually, in isometric view, quite important to have an orthographic projection, because if it will be perspective, it will look like this. So here, using this switcher, you can switch between two projections, orthographic and perspective. Explain the difference between these two projections is very easy. Perspective projection is a natural projection. This is how we see our world. The farther object from us, the smaller it will look like. Here we can clearly say that this ball is behind this cube, because we just understand it. But in orthographic projection, the depth doesn't work like that. The orthographic projection shows you the shape without any perspective distortion. So here we see two objects, the cube and the sphere, but we can't say which object is where. You still think that ball is behind the cube, but no. Orthographic projection used most of the time for modeling process, because for example when you work with a mesh object, so you work with vertices, edges, you need to be exactly sure about if the shape of your model is correct, aligned, symmetrical, etc. And perspective distortion can only hinder you. That's why this projection is set by default. This is it. I show you all necessary panels and controls you need to know in the beginning. There is one more panel, Object panel. When you select any object, Project panel will switch to the Object panel. But we will take a look at all objects and the settings they have in this panel in the next video. So, see you!